Hi there guys, I hope you are having a good day. Now, we know that Deontay Wilder called a certain amount of names, considering he might not get that Tyson Fury fight. So, who are the names? Well, they were Andy Ruiz Jr., Dillian White, Robert Helenius was also in there, and there was Alexander Usyk, in addition to Joseph Parker. Now, I think that the best fight and the easiest fight to make would be Andy Ruiz. I think that the Dillian White fight would be a good one as well, but probably the easiest fight to make would be Andy Ruiz because they're both on the same platform. So that fight should happen. I believe that what should happen is Deontay Wilder should have an interim fight, and so should Andy Ruiz Jr. because he's going to do that anyway. So if they both have an interim fight, then next year they can have a blockbuster fight because that would be big. There would be many fight fans willing to watch that, and it would show that Deontay Wilder is willing to step up, and after calling a name like Andy Ruiz Jr., it's about time he got in the ring and done it. That is the important thing. It's all very well calling these names, but unless you back it up in the ring, like Anthony Joshua, Dillian White, Tyson Fury have done, then it doesn't mean anything. Now, does Wilder have a chance in there with Andy Ruiz? Yes, he has a chance in there with everyone, for one simple fact. He punches hard enough to knock anyone out, and I think that we cannot look beyond that. Whether you like Deontay Wilder or not, you have to admit, he does punch extremely hard, but he does lack certain fundamentals that maybe Andy Ruiz Jr. would be able to exploit. Does Andy Ruiz Jr. have the ability to take punches, to land punches with Deontay Wilder? To a certain extent, yes. If the wrong punch lands though, at the wrong time, when he doesn't expect it, then it will knock him out, because I think that Deontay Wilder does punch that hard, but I think that also, Ruiz will walk him down, he'll push him back, he'll put him under pressure, and we've seen how Wilder copes in that kind of environment in the Tyson Fury rematch, so how he deals with that would be interesting. Now, when Tyson Fury was walking Deontay Wilder down, what he was also doing is using his positioning, using his footwork, and also getting those long legs out there so that Deontay Wilder can constantly see them. So what he is doing is stepping heavy with that lead foot to make Deontay Wilder feel like the pressure is on. He's right there in front of him and he's getting closer. If his feet are in vision of Deontay Wilder, then he can land punches. That is what Deontay Wilder will know. If he can see his feet, then Tyson Fury will be throwing punches and landing them. And therefore he can land his punches. The difference is he was not able to because Tyson Fury was putting him under so much pressure that he was rushed. He could not set his feet, he could not set up that right hand. Also, Tyson Fury was positioned just to the side of Wilder. So when Wilder let loose with that right hand, he was reaching across his body to throw it, taking a lot of the power out of that punch, which was very smart from Tyson Fury. So it wasn't just a game plan of, I'm going to put a front foot fighter on the back foot. There was so much more to it than just that. Tyson Fury went in there with certain fundamentals that he was able to execute because he's a skillful fighter. Now, can Andy Ruiz Jr. do the same thing? Well, I don't think that his positioning and footwork is as good as Tyson Fury, so he will struggle with that. But I think that he will close the distance probably just as quick, considering he does like to rush in. He throws punches and combinations also. I think that he will get closer than Tyson Fury did because he needs to. He will try and get on the inside, get right up close to Deontay Wilder and make it rough, work to the body and to the head. And we saw that Deontay Wilder could not sustain a body attack from Tyson Fury. Andy Ruiz would do that also, and I think that he would find that very difficult to manage in there with a fighter who is as durable and strong, fast and surprisingly powerful also. So what would the prediction be? Would Andy Ruiz Jr. get the knockout? I believe so, but I believe that you cannot never count out someone like Deontay Wilder, because when someone has that kind of concussive knockout power, you have to wonder, if that punch lands, can the opponent take it? That is the question. We do know that Andy Ruiz Jr. has a granite chin, and can sustain a certain amount of punishment when he is in there. His style completely relies on that anyway, because he's not a slick boxer, he's a fighter who likes to get on the inside and make it rough. He can box to a certain extent, but the physical advantages of his opponents will always allow them to outbox him if they can, if they have the ability, such as Anthony Joshua did, such as Tyson Fury would. If there is someone who is smaller, then that makes it more difficult for them to outbox him, because they don't have the physical advantages and the distance to keep between them. If someone tries to box him who's a bit smaller and it doesn't have the same reach, then Andy Ruiz Jr. will land counter hooks. Whereas if someone has the size advantages such as Anthony Joshua, they can stand tall, they can get that jab out, they can throw straight shots, allowing them to keep that distance because hooks are shorter than straight shots. That was the mistake Anthony Joshua made. He went in there hooking with a hooker, meaning that he was allowing Andy Ruiz Jr. to close that distance. If Anthony Joshua throws straight shots, in there with Ruiz doesn't always work because sometimes you can miss and that does leave you vulnerable to a counter, but still, if in there with someone like Andy Ruiz, and Anthony Joshua as he did, had those physical advantages, that allows him to create that distance, thus not allowing Andy Ruiz to land any hooks. And I guess the question you could ask is, yes, Deontay Wilder does have the physical advantages, but does he have the ability in order to keep Andy Ruiz Jr. at range? Because again, it isn't just about having those physical advantages, just as it wasn't just about beating Deontay Wilder by pushing a front foot fighter on the back foot. There is more to it than that. It was because Anthony Joshua had certain fundamentals that he had not neglected in the sport of boxing that allowed him to go back to those basics, and that is always there for AJ to call upon. Is it there for Deontay Wilder? I would say that he's neglected certain aspects of boxing because he got the knockout early on in his career, so certain fundamentals have been missed by Deontay Wilder because those knockouts started to come. When he was undefeated and had knocked out everyone he stepped in the ring with, that was dangerous in the sense that he was going to start neglecting certain things because he believes that he doesn't need to know them. He's a knockout artist. He always gets that KO. No matter what happened in there, he was always getting that knockout. Even in there with Luis Ortiz, who, let's be real, was a step up for Deontay Wilder, yet he got the knockout after being outboxed for a majority of the contest. So you have to wonder if that punch is always going to land. But it did in the first Tyson Fury fight. He got up. It did in the second one, but Tyson Fury was wise to it. He knew how to ride the shots, he knew how to counter them. So in that case, Deontay Wilder found himself in a situation where he needed to call upon certain aspects of boxing that he had neglected previously, and it wasn't there. So going into a fight with Andy Ruiz Jr. where you do need to have certain physical advantages to be able to keep him at range unless you are going to stand there and have a fight with him. So someone like Deontay Wilder would not be able to stand there and have a fight with Andy Ruiz Jr. and come out on top. He just wouldn't, because Ruiz is too fast, too powerful, and has too much dexterity to his punches, whereas Wilder has one big shot. He can put them together, but nowhere near as good as Andy Ruiz Jr., so he can't stand there and have a fight with him, so he needs to keep him at range. He can do that with the physical advantages he has, but not with the ability that he has. That would be the worry in there with Andy Ruiz Jr. for Deontay Wilder. He can always land that one punch though. That is always going to be there for him, but there are certain things that he needs more so than just that at this kind of level. That would be the worry for him in this fight, but still, it is a fight that I would like to see, and I think we will all agree, it's a fight everyone would want to see. It's a big fight, it's a big statement for Deontay Wilder. He has said the name, we didn't, so now it's time for him to deliver. Go and get the fight, prove everyone wrong, prove that you still are a big player in the heavyweight division. Words don't mean anything in the sport of boxing. If he backs it up in the ring, then fair play to him. I want to see him in there with Andy Ruiz Jr. I think that is probably the best fight that can be made off of the list that he gave those 5 opponents. Guys, anyway, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a thumbs up, and subscribe if you are new. Thanks guys.